Hi, my name is Catherine Smart. I am coming to you recorded from Woodbridge, Virginia, about 25 miles south of Washington, D.C. And I am really excited to be able to speak with you all tonight. And I want to start by saying thank you very, very much for this opportunity. It's an honor to be a part of this organization, even in the smallest way. My father was enlisted. He was a non-commissioned officer, and it was for him and for our family a way to get out of poverty. We were not people with means, and it was sort of a rough time economically for the country and also for my dad's family. So joining the Army gave him a career, it gave him skills, and it brought him into the world. We were stationed in Turkey within, I think, a year of his enlisting in the Army. So with a young family, he ended up moving all over, well, Germany. We moved around Germany a lot, but we lived in Texas and California. I'm from Lowell, my dad's from Quincy, and for us, those kind of places were just, it was beyond what we ever could have dreamed. I applied for college and I got in, and then I tried to figure out how to fund it, which is not a thing I would recommend for anybody, but it was where we were at experience-wise. And my roommate was in ROTC, so I applied and I was like, oh, they teach you stuff and they also feed you. But it gave me a group to be a part of, and they were striving towards good things like learning how to support each other as teams and to lead with kindness and firmness and to improve yourself in a lot of different ways. And I became a military police officer. And it's funny because that's not something I ever would have thought of, but the Gulf War had happened and the military police were on television a lot, just doing various skills that had not been at the forefront of my understanding. And as a woman, this was 1992. So as a woman, I could not get into a combat arm, but I wanted to do something that I felt was the most combat arms adjacent skill that a woman could do, like infantry and armor and engineers and tankers and those sorts of things. Those fields weren't open to women back then, but the military police corps was a place where you could be as close to the front lines as possible and still feel as though you're contributing to whatever the mission is. And my first duty station was in Germany at the same place as my dad's duty station when I was a little girl in elementary school. So it was kind of a full circle thing for me. And it made me feel like this, in a way, was the family industry. One particular story that sort of struck me the most as a young lieutenant was we were tasked to support this big artillery unit for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And we went to St. Mary-Église in France, and we went for 3 weeks, and my platoon went, and it was this wonderful experience. My name was pulled out of a hat. My platoon was due next for a tasker, and I ended up on the list. So I went to my first meeting. I had a notebook. I had 2 pens in case one of them ran out. I was so prepared. I had a fresh cup of coffee, and I sat at the table. And they went around the room, this unit that I was supposed to support, and it was a colonel, and he was like the division artillery, which is like second only to God in importance, is what they told me. So I'm being meek and quiet and just taking notes, and they got to me and they're like, Lieutenant Burke. And I was like, yes, sir. And they're like, you're not a guy. And I was like, I'm not sure how to answer that. And I said, apparently not, sir. Which made people laugh, but not the guy in charge. And I think there was a lot of consternation because they did not realize their unit did not have women in it. My platoon had me plus 3 or 4 others. And so this went all the way up to the corps, that's a 3-star general. The commander of this unit had to decide whether or not they were going to allow this little platoon to go. We were supposed to do traffic control for them to make sure that the roads were open and, there was no war fighting happening, and whether you have ovaries or not is not going to be a problem for those things. And so I went to my boss too, and I was like, what's the issue with this? I don't understand why they don't want us. The word that came back was, well, you and your female soldiers have different hydraulics, so we're not sure how to support you. I was appalled. I thought, I've been through the same training. I've done all this stuff. And just because we have to use different bathrooms, they don't want us to go. And it turned out that the housing we were in was going to be an elementary school gymnasium. And so I said, well, let the 4 of us or 5 of us women use the locker room or the shower space as our sleeping space. And we put up our cots there. Well, it had to go all the way back up the chain of command, and they had to hem and haw about it for weeks. And then it came back and they said, well, we're going to try it out and see if it works. And so we were kind of on this probation with these units. And so when we went there were thousands of men soldiers, and they would all come in and like look at us and go like they'd never seen a woman before. And all we were doing was traffic control and the same kind of things that police do in the United States on a daily basis. So my soldiers and I were pretty upset about it at first because I was young and I didn't have the knowledge that like sometimes you just persevere through it and win them over that way. But we did a great job. My soldiers did a great job, the men and the women, and I did a great job. And it was because we worked hard, we took our mission seriously. And at the end, the commander said to me and to my soldiers, you know what, we learned something here from it. And that has stuck with me forever, that lesson, not just because I was a woman and I had female soldiers and they didn't know what to do with us, but just in general, when you encounter an obstacle, sometimes all you can do is your best. And if it works out, that's pretty cool. But the thing that I learned was that I'm not going to change who I am and my standards for myself. And I also wasn't going to take no for an answer because this was the mission of a lifetime. It was wonderful. And so the fact that we got to go on it is still, to this day, 30 years later, one of the high points of my life, professionally and probably personally. It was wonderful until I had the baby. They just didn't really know what to do with us now that I had demands outside the office. Like our child was in daycare from the minute it opened until it closed. We would get Post-it notes that said, you know, Ryan rolled over for the first time. And so in his baby book, those were the things that I have. I didn't see it. My husband didn't see it. The daycare providers, who were lovely, wonderful humans, but not his parents, they were the ones that saw it. And there was a time when we had to go to a briefing, and it was a briefing about cadet shoes. Nothing, like the world is not going to end if this briefing doesn't happen. But our boss's boss did not feel as though proper attention was being given to uniform standards or something along those lines. So he had an all-hands meeting. That means everybody has to go. And we were meant to be there. And my son was probably 2.5, 3 months old at this point, and he was sick and had to not be at the daycare center. So I had to go get him, and I brought him home, and my executive officer called me and he's like, you have to be at this meeting. And I said, well, my husband is also supposed to be at the meeting and I have to be here with our child because the daycare center said he has a fever and he can't be there. And I ended up taking my sick baby into work because that was the expectation. He said, you need to show that you're part of the team and you're committed. So I sat there with a feverish baby in the back, which is not exactly the height of professionalism either. And it was more for the optics of being there than it was for the actual, like, okay, let's think about it. Does this make sense? And that's something that taught me a lot as I became more senior and became a manager and a leader. What kind of things are we actually penalizing our subordinates for? And this isn't just the military. I think this sort of expands to the civilian world as well. But, you know, if a kid's sick, a kid's sick. So we had to make some decisions as a family, which is what led to me ultimately getting out anyway. But the fact that I was powerless to change those things then sat with me for a long time. I couldn't change it, right? But when I became a manager, that was really the lessons I learned more about what I had experienced that was untenable for my family. You know, ways in which my family had to do cheetah flips just to get to work during a day. Another example you have a lot from women soldiers is the daycare center doesn't open until after you have to be at your first formation for physical training. it's a simple fix. You just move the time of physical training, but that's viewed as somehow we're losing our who-ness. Like it's not taking anything away from the unit to accommodate the very real needs of the family members. In the intervening years, this group of women that we had just the honor of being able to work with, they've gone through those same kind of things. They've hit those different wickets at life, like when you're going to have a baby, or you have a relationship with somebody who lives in a different state and the military wants to move one or both of you, or how do you decide when it's time to leave, or when is it quitting and when is it taking care of you? They're just thorny questions, life questions that all of us have. But because the Army puts you up against this timeline, right? You got to be at this place in time by this year in your career, and you move every couple of years. So it puts this artificial sense of urgency on those life decisions that are already stressful. So I've kind of got this network of women that we accidented into each other. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm going to make it one. We all went out for coffee, and then we're like, we should meet for wine. And we ended up having a women veterans weekend away a couple of years ago. And we cried a lot and laughed a lot and talked about just the silliest things that, that happened to you in this life. And it felt really good to realize you're not alone. It felt good to know somebody else has gone through these things. And these were simple things like I had to nurse my baby and I'd been at a meeting and I couldn't. And I don't know if you've had the pleasure of nursing a child, but biology is going to decide when it's time. And I finally got released from the meeting and I took my pump and I ran into the ladies' room because that's the place with the plug. And then the fire alarm came on. And I was huddled over the plug with this, back in the early 2000s, the machine was, the size of the nuclear briefcase. And all of a sudden, the sprinklers came on. And I thought, I don't care if this building is on fire. I'm going to finish this job. And so we've just decided that we're going to be there for each other through different parts. And now we're all at the stage of life where your kids are grown and we're hitting the middle years and we're starting to reflect on what matters. Having each other has been more grounding for me than any other group in my life. I taught English as a high school teacher and we read Beowulf. The biggest thing that they talked about is like this hero thing, right? Like who gets to be a hero? And Beowulf is clearly the hero because he like swims with the dragons and then, slays all the monsters and does all the things. But what do they do? How do we make somebody a hero? It's when we sit and we talk about them, right? And we talk with them. And so to me, being a veteran, especially a woman veteran, has been about finding that community. And it's not necessarily like an industry with a business that has a sign and posted hours, but just even a conversation with somebody else. And you ask somebody like the same wonderful questions that you've asked me here. What was something that was wonderful? What was hard? What was a challenge? And you build a connection with that person and you learn what their story is. I would just like to say thank you so much for this opportunity, and I wish all of you the best and have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening.